Formula 1 pre-season testing is over. The next time we will see the cars on track will be in free practice for the first race of the campaign. But who won the testing war, and what might the competitive order be heading into the season? The race has ranked the teams 10th to 1st based on a combination of outright pace, corrected lap times, race pace, trackside impressions, and information gathered by our team in the F1 paddock. This is not necessarily the definitive order we will see at the first race of the season because of all the usual problems of comparing testing performances and the fact many will upgrade their cars. But it's the best possible order based on the limited information available. We'd also like to know how you would rank the teams in pre-season testing. Let us know in the comments below. Here's our ranking. Williams is well ahead of where it was last year, although that's not saying much given the team's lack of pace in 2019 and pre-season troubles. We can be confident Williams is now back in the very tight midfield group again, rather than well behind it. The car looked far more convincing on track, with George Russell from the first day of testing saying it was completely different to the old car that was often scary, as he put it, to drive. While Williams did suffer 2 engine problems that forced power unit changes, as well as an engine issue that forced Russell to abandon his final race sim, it still completed enough laps to get a good understanding of a car that is responding far better to changes than its predecessor. What really matters is that its pace is good enough to go racing for real in 2020. The signs are that it can do that, and while it is last in our rankings, Williams could become an occasional Q2 threat this year, even though Russell himself described it as definitely the worst car. 9. Haas. This time last year, Haas was very confident, having performed well in pre-season testing. It then won the midfield battle in the season-opening Australian Grand Prix before serious problems started to manifest themselves that ruined the team's season. The car was overworking the rear tyres, a consequence of an aero problem that led to the rear-end downforce stalling on the entry and turn-in phase to low and medium-speed corners. In warmer temperatures, this was a serious problem in races. Therefore, the team took a completely different approach to testing this year, spending much of its running time rigorously gathering data to ensure there was no repeat of the problem. Haas did eventually get going, with Kevin Magnussen completing its first race simulation on day 5 and Romain Grosjean its best time on day 6. While we didn't see any spectacular lap times from Haas, which was slowest of all, the car looks solid and it could have a foundation to build from without running into the problems of 2019. 8. Alfa Romeo. Sauber-run Alfa Romeo was in the upper reaches of the timesheets for much of testing, but that was misleading and it appears to be in the group of the lower midfielders. From trackside, the car is a little more understeery than its rivals, and new front and rear wings introduced during the final test baffled the race's technical expert Gary Anderson. He suggested this would make the Alfa Romeo more unstable, and sure enough, we saw both drivers have offs, with Antonio Giovinazzi hitting the barrier lightly on day 5. Kimi Raikkonen also set the fastest speed of testing in the main speed trap, located just before turn 1 on the final day of running. He clocked 334.4 km per hour, suggesting that the car is relatively low in drag. 7. AlphaTauri. The renamed Toro Rosso team has set lofty targets for 2020, aiming for a record 5th in the Constructors' Championship. Testing suggests that even if it's not quite there yet on pace, it is close enough to be in the mixed. Carlos Sainz Jr. even suggested that, along with Racing Point, AlphaTauri would prove to be McLaren's biggest opposition in the front of the midfield fight. AlphaTauri had a very solid test, lapping consistently in the hands of Daniel Kvyat and Pierre Gasly, although it did struggle with an inherent understeer problem. From trackside, the car looked good, and as usual, the mission will be to add downforce to a car that uses plenty of components from the 2019 Red Bull, including the rear suspension and gearbox. But the aerodynamics and part of the front suspension are AlphaTauri's own and are very different to last year's Red Bull. With rule stability, Red Bull support and the most experienced driver lineup it's ever had, AlphaTauri looks set to be in the thick of the midfield fight and capable of Q3 on a good day. 6. Renault. Judged by lap time alone, Renault was third fastest team in pre-season testing thanks to Daniel Ricciardo's pace on the final day. But this is a team with its eyes on the midfield fight, and despite being a works team, it didn't show enough to suggest it will definitely be at the sharp end of F1's Class B at the start of the season. The team conducted plenty of setup experiments during testing, leading it to lose its way a little on the morning of day 5. From trackside, the car looked a little uncomfortable over curbs at times, but was still able to carry decent speed through the corners. Developments brought to the second test also suggested it was working to reduce understeer. The pressure is on Renault this year after a disappointing 2019. The team appears to have a car that is thereabouts in the midfield, but needs to find some performance if it is to consistently lead the way in Class B. 5. McLaren. McLaren started off testing with what Carlos Sainz Jr. called a basic car, one that was still a little weaker than hoped for in the slow corners in Barcelona's third sector. But upgrades introduced for the second test, including a new rear diffuser, improved the Renault-engined MCL35 to the point where it looked like the second best of the midfielders. More upgrades are coming early in the season for a car that technical director James Key believes has plenty of potential for development. On track, the car looked the part and appeared well balanced even if it was lacking the grip of the front runners. That's an improvement from last year in testing when the car looked a little unstable in places before upgrades allowed it to take a step forward and become consistently F1's Class B leader, but they do have a fight on their hands against Racing Point. 4. Racing Point. Racing Point was the talk of the Barcelona paddock when it revealed what became dubbed the Pink Mercedes on the first morning of running. The car is, by the team's own admission, aerodynamically a clone of the 2019 Mercedes, achieved by extensive study of the car and photographs, for using a rival's design data for aero surfaces is illegal. But the Racing Point does share rear-end components with the 2019 Mercedes, and despite a few small visual differences, it is a very similar car. So perhaps it's no surprise that from the off the RP20 looked impressively quick, showing both single lap and race pace. While some, including Ferrari team principal Mattia Binotto, suggested the Racing Point might threaten the big three in the races early on in the year, performance analysis suggests it doesn't quite have the turn of speed to do that. But it's plenty fast enough to lead the way in the midfield, provided the team understands how to get the best out of what is a very different concept to its previous cars at circuits other than Barcelona. 3. Ferrari. Sandbagging, playing its cards close to its chest, and conservative engine modes were all accusations levelled at Ferrari during testing. But while it did take a different approach to testing compared to 2019, when it was consistently fast from the start, Ferrari did eventually show the pace to be up there with Red Bull and within striking distance of Mercedes. The feedback on its attempts to add downforce to the car have been overwhelmingly positive, but the trade-off is an increase in drag. Ferrari has hinted this is the reason for its lower speed trap figures, rather than any conservative engine modes that Mercedes have suggested was the real cause. There isn't panic in the Ferrari camp, and if its estimate of the gap to Mercedes is true, it doesn't have a big deficit to the front. Certainly, it's one that strong development work can overcome. If it is third best, Ferrari is not far off, and can still be in the mix for victories. 2. Red Bull. Max Verstappen should have been faster on his performance runs in the final hour of testing, so Red Bull didn't even deliver the lap time it should have done, even carrying more fuel than it would in a normal qualifying session. The Red Bull was certainly off track more than would be expected during testing, which hinted at an instability problem in the low speed corners, despite both Verstappen and Alex Albon suggesting it was simply the consequence of exploring the limits. But from trackside, it looked mighty in the first sector. Red Bull introduced upgrades on the penultimate day of running, including modified barge boards estimates suggest could be worth 0.2 of a second. The team also appears confident it can make a stronger start than it has done in previous seasons. Based on testing, Red Bull's claim to being the second best is under serious pressure from Ferrari, but because of the underlying raw pace it showed, it takes the position in our ranking. 1. Mercedes set the fastest time in testing, completed the most laps and had the most impressive long-run pace. The dominant team of the past 6 seasons proved in Barcelona that it hasn't dropped the ball with the new W11. It wasn't all positive for Mercedes because it did hit engine problems. Lewis Hamilton stopped mid-afternoon on day 5, which led to Mercedes running more conservatively with a fresh engine on the final day. But while that is cause for concern, the fact Mercedes completed so many laps suggests anyone hoping this will be a major weakness in 2020 will be disappointed, even if Hamilton himself did admit to plenty of problems. The car also looked superb on track. Both Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas were able to turn in with confidence and carry huge speed through the corners. Mercedes will head to the first race of the season as clear favourites to take a 7th consecutive victory in the opening race of the championship. But Red Bull and Ferrari certainly aren't far away.